On September 7th, 2012, 15-year-old Amanda Todd uploaded a video to YouTube called My Story: Struggling, Bullying, Suicide, and Self-Harm. In this video, Amanda shares her struggles with anxiety and depression as she uses handwritten notes to tell her story. She begins by describing how in the 7th grade she was tricked into flashing a stranger on the internet while she was in a video chat with people from all over the world. And she goes on to share that just over a year later, she got this message on Facebook from a complete stranger threatening to release that image to her entire community unless she sent more lewd photos to him. This harassment, it went on for several weeks until early one morning. She was awakened by the police at her house telling her that that image she had sent had been distributed to their entire community. It was sent to her friends at school, to the administration, to neighbors. This began a series of events in Amanda's life which led to intense bullying and physical abuse at the hands of her peers. And it caused her to develop a severe anxiety and a deep depression, which ultimately led to her having to transfer schools multiple times over the course of that next year. But unfortunately, no matter how hard Amanda tried, she was unable to escape her past and the stigma that came along with it. Tragically, just over a month after this video was uploaded to YouTube, Amanda Todd took her own life. This young girl's story is absolutely heartbreaking. And what makes it all the more tragic for me, and probably for you as well, is that it's not really all that unique. You see, the story that Amanda tells of her battle with depression and anxiety is something that is known all too well by millions of kids all across our country and by the youth workers who love them. This comes as no shock to you, but over the past several decades, anxiety and depression have been on the rise at staggering rates in the United States. And for the many of us who work with students, sometimes when we're confronted with this data, we're at a loss for what to do. We don't know how to respond. That's probably what led you to this seminar. You see, we want to know what to do. We want to know how we can actually help. And it's my hope that with the things that we're going to be talking about today, that maybe when this is all over, you'll actually have some ideas for how you can be a part of the solution. My name is Nate, and I've been a youth pastor for the last 13 years. And about halfway through my time in ministry, I began to realize that there were things about students that I didn't understand that I needed to. That if I was going to be helpful in the way that I love them and care for them and minister to their families, there were some things that I needed to learn. And this led me on a journey to Fuller Seminary, where I began a doctorate of ministry course specifically focusing on youth, family, and culture. And over the course of this degree that I've been a part of, I have focused all of my research in this area of adolescent anxiety, depression, and suicide, trying to figure out what we as a church can do to be helpful. And so I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned, hoping that maybe for you it could be helpful as well. Now, before we get too deeply into this, there's a couple things that I want to say up front, things that I think you probably need to know before we go into this, because it's going to help you not only understand what I present, but also some of the changes that I'm going to recommend a little bit later. The first thing that I want you to know is this. My goal in our time together is not to give you a curriculum to teach to your kids. It's not to give you a plug-and-play program that's going to minister to kids who are dealing with anxiety and depression. It's not to give you a tool or a resource to go ahead and give to parents so they could better care for those kids. I think programs are great. I think teaching is great. I think tools are great. But I think we have to admit that those things aren't the only solutions when it comes to facing an issue of this magnitude. It is far too complex for any one thing to fix. This is why I'm convinced that the way we as youth workers can help best is by working hard to strategically create ministries that our students, regardless of their mental health condition, can both belong to and thrive in. It's with that in mind that the goal of this seminar is to actually help you think through the systems that you currently have in place in light of the sociological data that is available to us, so that you can make some changes that are going to lead to long-term health for those students you have who are dealing with mental health disorders like anxiety and depression. The second thing that I want to say up front is this, and I think this is really important. It's so important, in fact, that I actually put it in your handbook. When we're thinking about these things, when we're thinking about our response and what we need to do, we've got to be deeply aware of the role that we play as youth workers. Because how we respond is going to be directly tied to the way in which we see ourselves. You see, as youth workers, we got to know we're not counselors. We're not therapists. We're not Jesus. We're pastors. We're guides. We are mentors. We are friends. These are the roles that we play with the students that we're leading. Our job is not to be the people who come in to try to fix them. Our job is to come in and to love students and walk alongside of them, to care for them by creating safe spaces, and to get them the help that they need when they need it. All right, so now that we've got that out of the way, what I want to do is I want to give you just a really brief overview of this seminar, some of the things we're going to be talking about so you can kind of get your mind thinking about it. We're going to start off by looking at some of the latest data surrounding adolescent anxiety and depression. All right, now fair warning, this is going to be a pretty statistic-heavy session, and so I'm going to ask you to bear with me through that because I think some of the stuff that we're going to talk about is actually really important. Before we could ever talk about how we're going to respond, we first have to know what's actually happening. Well, in the next session, we're going to peel back the layers of the onion just a little bit, and right, because at that point we know what's happening. What I want to do is I want to look at some of the data that actually might help us understand why it's happening. Again, this is going to be information heavy, I get that, but it's really significant when it comes down to how we're going to craft our response. In this section, we're going to focus primarily on what Dr. Chap Clark has written about when it comes to systemic abandonment, and we're going to look at these 5 factors that are actually influencing it, and all of that is actually going to be the basis on which we craft our response a little bit later. Well, after looking at the data in the next session, we're going to spend some time exploring some theological themes that are going to have a direct impact on the way in which you respond. Right, as followers of Jesus, we are the carriers of the hope of the gospel, and the gospel is not just about what happens after we die. It also impacts us in the way in which we live, and it challenges the systems that we have, specifically the ones that have to do with how we care for those who are broken and disenfranchised. Well, in light of all of that, in session 5, we're going to start talking about some of the systemic changes that we can make to counter the devastating effects of systemic abandonment. We're going to give you guys some practical ideas and tips of what you could be doing, but more than that, we're going to focus on the 10,000-foot level, talking about strategies and systems, and hopefully as we go through that, you'll get some ideas of how that might apply in your own context. In session 6, we're going to take a little time to talk about how to build a team to help you do all of this. Right? Because what we're going to talk about, it's a lot of stuff, and it is more than any one individual can do on their own. But when you get the right team around you who can help you think in the right way, who can bring the right skill set, it's going to enable you to better care for and love and serve students dealing with mental health disorders. In our final session, we're going to do a summary and wrap the seminar up. Now, just a quick reminder, if you have not yet downloaded the handbook, I want to encourage you to do that before our next session. So much of what we're going to cover in this seminar is there in your handbook. We've got additional resources. We've also got some pre-seminar reflections before each session, and then we've got some post-session reflection questions as well afterwards. So once you've got that handbook downloaded, head over to session 2 and meet us there.